Do you rock? Most people enjoy a good story. Imagine a story where you rock. I challenge you to make a difference in the world and then share your story to inspire, bring hope and encouragement to others. Together, let us create a better, more peaceful world. Let's not just imagine world peace. Let's work for it. Are you doing something rocking in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, or the world? I would love to have you on my show to share your rocking stories. We are here with Jason Rorick with post-traumatic stress disorder. Morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Very good. Yourself?
Good. So thank you for being on my show. And what is post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological injury. It's usually the result of something serious, life-threatening, either being part of it or just witnessing it. So anything like your mass shootings, a natural disaster, sexual assault, or serious car accidents. The post-traumatic stress comes is after that incident of something that continues to affect you, not just in the immediate aftermath, but it can be months, years after it. So when you're continually affected by that event, that's essentially what it is.
Okay, so talk about your experience with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, well, this is it's a little interesting. It was I was one of those people that really didn't believe in this. I didn't believe in people being so stressed they couldn't do things. I didn't believe in psychologists and stuff like that. I didn't think that there was really any reality behind it. And as usual, arrogance precedes the fall, and that's essentially what happened. When I started in policing, same thing. I thought, this is no problem. Stress is never going to affect me. Within 23 months, I had been to 14 fatal incidents. I'd watched 3 people die, a 19-year-old, a 15-year-old, and I watched a co-worker killed feet within me. I was the first one to respond, obviously, with first aid. In a situation that was still dangerous, that we had to kind of move and adapt in it. On top of that, I had spent 40 minutes at gunpoint waiting for the shooting to begin and backup to arrive. We did end that situation peaceful, and we went from there. Due to family issues, I was switching over organizations, and I did. And I thought being in a city with more officers and more backup and more people to take the calls was going to be a lot better as a bonus to it. And it was the same thing. I still attended deaths. I watched an additional 3 people die. I was handed a 2-week-old baby dead.
Oh my goodness.
This was the first time in my life that I froze for a second. I actually didn't know what to do. EMS was there, and they were great help, and they took the baby. And I thought a lot about that one because at that point, I just went right into questioning. Didn't even register how serious that event was for the mother and how serious an event I was in. I just went right to questioning. I thought a long time after that action, really felt how emotionless I'd become. And this was really evident in my personal life. I'd become very withdrawn. I'd become basically a hermit. There wasn't many places I went because they reminded me of these incidents, or I thought that there was going to be a serious incident that I was going to see. Either I was going to see death or be in a situation to have to respond like that. So I became very secluded, always at my boiling point. There was not much room to push me over the top for anger. And obviously in the industry, there's a lot of stigma around PTSD. So there was a lot of factors working to not get help. It became the point I was actually looking quite regular at my gun and just wondering how easy would it be to end it all? How quickly could this just be over? Obviously, I knew there was a problem. I'd always come back to family, and that was a great resource for me. But it was still that fear of getting help, of what everyone was going to say. And interesting enough, I've been trained as a hypnotist before that, so I wrote a hypnosis about doing the right thing, regardless of what people say. Listened to it the next night at work, and the next day after that, I was in the psychologist's office getting the help I needed. And I did work through with the psychologist. I did a lot of extra work on my own and learned a lot of techniques to help deal with the stress and just dealing with seeing traumatic events. and was able to return to work and return to the same duty, same company as had pushed me to that breaking point years ago.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and sharing your story, because I'm sure there's other people that experience many things that you've experienced and how to deal with trauma. So what have you learned about how to deal with trauma?
Well, number one, we have to be a lot more gentle with ourselves, especially for me. To believe that I could be affected by trauma was a hard pill to swallow. I had to learn to be gentle and forgive myself and understand that even I could be affected by it. And once I did that, it was easier to move forward. Definitely not bottling it up is extremely important, and not trying to keep all of that on yourself. Acceptance and understand that there's more people. There's 45%, it's 44.5% in the emergency fields from a study just done by University of Regina that are suffering from one or more psychological illness right now.
So that is almost 1 out of 2. That's a high number.
It is. So there's more people that are suffering. Use those resources of your coworkers. And now I would be probably the biggest supporter for actually seeing a psychologist and getting the psychologist help. They're going to help you learn to accept it, normalize it, and give you some great techniques moving forward.
So is there lots of resources out for people with PTSD?
We're starting to see a change in both the industry and just generally in the communities, where we're getting a lot more resources. There is in Saskatoon, there's a support group, PTSD Facebook.
Okay.
This is a support group where they're not there to diagnose you, they're not there to give counseling, but people that have walked through the same path and are able to just support you and help you with techniques that they've learned and what's helped them.
So what do you think has helped you the most?
Well, probably the first thing was, as a psychologist once said, you're not being mindful. These incidents happen in the past, they're affecting you today because you're not being mindful of today. Do you know what mindfulness means? I said, of course I know what mindfulness means. I walked away and I'm like, I have no clue what he was talking about.
Yes.
So I actually ended up researching and becoming a mindfulness meditation instructor.
Okay.
And that is probably one of the biggest techniques that helps separate from that trauma, is being mindful in every single moment.
So what is mindfulness?
It's really being aware of your situation that you're in right now, non-judgmentally. And that's the kicker, and that's the important part, is the non-judgmentally. You don't worry about if it's a smell or a sight that you don't like. You don't judge that. It is what it is. You see it, you be there, you experience it, and you're able to move on, because the next moment, obviously there's change and you're in a different situation. The first time I ever did this, driving a drive that I had done for 8 years, the whole drive changed. I realized the road was slanted. It was a lot more bumpy than I realized for a paved road, because it was the first time I had ever driven mindful. And that's probably one of the biggest things that's going to help initially. And with your peers, and there is going to be peers, they do say things. I did have to face that. My second biggest technique for that was self-confidence. It ended up leading me to be designated as a master self-confidence coach. And believe it or not, confidence does need work. We think it's kind of you have it or you don't, but there's skills and techniques you can do to develop it. So.
What are some of those skills and techniques?
Some of it is challenging yourself in different areas of life. I noticed one of the most interesting challenges was simply going into a restaurant and asking for just a glass of water, not ordering something. They'll say no or they'll say yes, but just doing something where you don't feel that you had to order and pushing by that. And recognizing your worth. One of the first drills I started doing, I did this with my kids, is reasons you're wonderful. And I would sit down and I couldn't think of one the first time. Then 5 a day was no problem. And I started doing that. It's just listing the reasons that you're wonderful. And you're going to understand that everybody has tons of reasons they're wonderful, but we don't think that way. We don't talk about ourselves that way. We think we don't want to be arrogant, which is for sure, but we can be confident, accept our skills and accept the things we need to work on.
Well, you rock because you came on the show to share your experience, and it's so wonderful to have you here and to share. And maybe there's other people that are suffering or were suffering like you. How are you feeling now?
I feel great. The common question I get asked is, did you come back as good as when you first started, before all the stress and trauma? And my answer is always no. I'm 1,000 times better today than I ever was.
And why are you attributing that to?
I know what to expect. I know how to deal with it when I come into what I expect. I know the techniques to deal with it. I'm not doing this blind anymore, and I have all the techniques in place. It allows me to be better mentally, physically, than I ever was starting.
So what are some of those resources, again, if people that are watching this show today can look for, or what kind of help can they get? What's the first thing they should do?
You can come to my website, confidenthypnotist.net. What I've included is a website to the University of Regina, an anonymous assessment tool. Great place. Nobody's monitoring it. Nobody's going to follow up. Nobody's monitoring it at all. You can just go in there, take the tool, and it'll kind of let you know where you sit in compared to magazine articles and journal articles in regards to that. As well as I did mention, there's that PTSD support group, just PTSD Facebook. If you search Saskatoon's PTSD support group, you'll find that. They meet twice a month. And if you search PTSD psychologist in Saskatoon as well, you'll come up with a list of wonderful psychologists that are able to give that professional help as well.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's good to have resources. And what are some last bit of advice you could give someone out there that maybe is suffering?
Don't suffer alone. Don't believe that you're the only one that's suffering. Don't believe that you're the only one that this has happened to. There's other people. Find the resources, get help. You're going to be better off for it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on my show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.